operating reserve has, a year-end balance of 600,000. Looking at potential alternative phase-ins of the workforce plan onto the levy, and lastly, looking at potential deferrals of capitals where expenses where appropriate, because we'd already thought we had some ideas in that regard. So the report you have before you identifies several potential changes to the budget that would create space within the operating budget to offset a greater proportion of the implementation of the workforce plan. And those are outlined in table 3, and we can walk through those if you like. As well, it identifies just some modest things in terms of implementation of the workforce plan for 2022, matters that we wouldn't pursue next year or that we'd fund differently. And then lastly, we looked at all the things that had been approved for funding under the operating reserve and looked which ones could be funded under the Glencairn Reserve in accordance with CA provincial policy. So what you get at the end of the day actually is something that's very close to what we tabled with you previously in terms of total numbers, but the outcomes on the operating reserve in particular is quite different. So if you look at the impact on the levies, it's just a $30 difference on the general levy. But because of what we've done behind the scenes with the rest of the budget, we're able to achieve those objectives with very modest impact on the general levy. And these are the numbers that were approved by the board in October. So no change to the total funding envelope with the exception of that $30. The budget totals do change though, and you can see them here in terms of the contribution to reserve is much higher. In part, that's because of a reduction here in the capital reserve and the offsetting of costs, though the operating costs go up because though we were saving money, we're also increasing in some other areas. So the offsetting by other revenues are offset here so that the total budget down here year over year, yes, it captures a greater amount of funding, but further to that previous slide, it actually has negligible impact on the levy. So at the last meeting and at previous meetings, we've had several conversations now about reserve balances, and we did have a conversation last week and again this week with Glenn Street from our auditors. And it was an interesting conversation. And I think we need to have more conversations in this because the approach that he was recommending is different from what municipalities, the approach municipalities take in terms of assessing financial health. So he was, pointing out, he did this historical analysis for us. He said, generally your surplus has been something just under 200,000 on average over the past 10 years. And your operating budget has been something just around under the 600,000 mark. But he was suggesting that we look at, instead of our total operating budget, a fraction of that and measure our operating reserves against that lesser amount. And that lesser amount is basically minus what we would pull out to pay for our, ongoing loans and as well as removing that portion of the operating budget paid by the operating levy, the general levy. So admittedly, this is an area that Andrew and I haven't had a whole lot of time to really explore with him and delve into as it pertains to this particular budget. But just looking at this here, where we're proposing to land, where the Finance Committee directed us last week to aim for something in around the 600 mark, is at least in line with the historical average of the organization. Definitely in recent years, we saw a blip that is largely attributed to last year's excessive surplus, which was attributable to largely to the pandemic and staff turnover. So moving on, this is how our operating reserves look, or our ratio of reserves to expenditures looks from the perspective of the province as applied under the FIR, the financial information returns that all the municipalities submit, and the risk indices that they have. So the approach the province takes is total reserves and discretionary reserve funds. So they're not just looking at the operating reserve, they're looking at all reserves against total municipal expenses. So when you look at all of our total budget for next year, 2020, at 5.7, and what our projected year-end reserve balance across all the reserves are, it actually comes out to 31.61, which according to the province's measures is actually low risk. So somewhere over the next, period of time, I'd like before our AGM, and I'm hoping we can come back with a reserve policy proposal to the Finance and Admin Committee in January. We need to sort out where we need to go. But for the purpose of today's discussion, I just wanted to let you know that from the FIR perspective and their risk indices, we seem to be in a good spot, while at the same time achieving the kind of target that's in alignment with our historical average. Now, that said, what the average doesn't allow for is the fact that, of course, our budgets have gone up over time. So that 600 is like a minimum threshold, given the ongoing rise in our budget associated with inflation and other pressures. So that's it in terms of the presentation, and I just wanted to know if there was interest in walking through tables 3, 4, and 5, or whether people wanted to leap into the conversation about the budget and the approach being taken and the impacts.
I think if you could, at a high level anyway, go through those tables, since we did get the package just recently. Yes. I think that'll put everybody at an even playing field for the discussion.
Okay, fair enough. So, so if you have page 4 and 5 of the package in front of you, so the first item, we're looking at administration costs and actually member expenses. So the expenses associated with your participation. And we were thinking that given that we will likely as an organization move to hybrid meetings where a percentage of members will not participate in person going forward, that it was reasonable to assume that some savings in those costs would be had going forward, that we'd always have people in the room and that we'd be paying mileage costs for, but that otherwise, we'd also have savings. Similarly, that costs for attending Conservation Ontario, they may also be saved, and those can be quite significant. So we are looking at a 3-year average and taking 75% of that. And so what you're seeing is the $22,000 represents that 25% of savings. The next one, we had talked about increasing the funding from the foundation for the Eco-Trekker, as well that there had been an error in the budget, so that the Carp River study by Ottawa U, it's finished. In fact, I have a paper to share with members on the work that they were done, which is very interesting. The Clyde River Subwatershed Model, we're intending to make that 100% grant funded. It's a modest amount, but by putting it onto a grant, it provides reduced pressure on the levy. And because this is something, you know, in terms of resources, if we could start it this year, we would, but if it doesn't happen in 2022, it's less of a concern than some of the other projects that we have scheduled for next year. In terms of planning and regulations, we had been very judicious, cautious in our projections. There is still ample room between what we had projected in revenues and what we're actually experiencing this year in terms of revenues, that we felt comfortable increasing revenues from planning and regulation applications by another $20,000. And perhaps you could elaborate a bit on this one, because you have the most recent numbers and have had conversations with Matt on this.
Yeah, so right now in our, gonna pull it up.
By the way, if you're wondering about the balloons, it's somebody's 50th birthday today.
Thank you, Sally. Thank you for, I was trying to stick my head over here. Anyway, right now in planning, what we're projecting by the end of December this year for revenues, right now, as of 2nd of November, our planning revenues were $370,000, and that was planning and regulations permits. We only budgeted in 2021 to receive 240. So we are at this point well ahead. And so what we predict by the end of the year, we could see as high as 385,000 in planning revenues by December 31st. And with that, with the revised budget, we're taking the possible revenues for next year just up to 305. So it's still a 28% variance between what the surplus will be this year in that department. And so we're still feeling cautious that 305 is not overselling what they should be able to, they may be making next year. And with that, a lot of the planning revenues, even though what we have to be mindful of is that the planning revenues that are received now may not necessarily, the work may not be completed now. The person has, or the developer has paid for the permit, but the work will take a long time and could fall into the next year, correct? So even though we've received those funds now, some of the work will happen next year on those subdivisions or larger developments. So.
And I guess the other piece of that, depending on where interest rates go, will we see a slowing in the sector or not? It's, you know, it's always a question mark. And I imagine within your own planning departments, you face the exact same uncertainty. You can never 100% predict what your revenues are going to be. We were cautious. We feel that, you know, going up by that 20,000 is still provides us with some buffer should we see a reduction over this year. So under visitor services, there are several small.
Sorry, Sally, which page you're getting?
I'm on 5 of 35 in the agenda package.
5 of the 35. Okay.
And
All
I'm in table 3. I'm now at item 6.
Got you. Sorry, I just need to follow. Okay, thank you.
No worries.
Actually, Sally, is it possible to do a screen share on that? I can still see everyone if there's questions, but we'll
Sure.
yeah, it might be just easier because then we are all seeing, we're all on the same line as you that way.
Yeah. Okay. Let me just call that up because I'm looking at a hard copy. Okay. And I will make it larger. How's that for everybody? Is that working? Great, good.
Looks good, thank you.
Yeah, no worries. Okie doke. So, so now I'm looking at visitor services here. These were very modest amounts and quite frankly underspent. And it also sort of speaks to an opportunity with our own budget line items organization that some of these things probably are best carried under communications, that page earlier in the budget package. And then line 8 was reduced to reflect actuals more closely. So we found some savings there. So all sum total, these changes came to 63,000 relief on pressures on the levy. Is there any questions regarding those before I move into table 4?
Not seeing anything for now.
Okay. So table 4 is looking at the workforce plan. And was there any opportunity for us to adjust that? So one thing that we had talked about when we were tabled the workforce plan was the desire to make the summer students 100% funding so that we have guaranteed support to staff during the summer, because we never know often till quite late in the spring whether or not we're getting federal funding. So one way to stave that off in part is, of course, to make them 50% as opposed to 100% grant funded. So this is one thing. And so these aren't all our summer students, but a portion of the summer students that we would make 50% grant dependent. So this is something, I mean, we have had good success in the past, but it's not a guarantee. So we're reasonably comfortable that we would probably get 1 or 2 of these grant funded, but not necessarily all 3. The next one we had talked about previously as moving on to the foundation. So it's pretty straightforward. And then the last one is the summer camp program. And, this is, in truth, is something that RVCA and we would have to talk about at length to get going. And, it's a modest amount. If we don't get it going this year, there's a lot that we also have on our plates regarding the regulation changes and the like. So I don't think this is a significant loss. It would be nice at some point in the future to be able to offer this service to local residents, but in my estimation, it's not a must-have. So these changes would offset the pressure by a further 34,400. So is there any questions on those?
Go ahead, Janet.
Great. Yeah, so just some questions. The 3 summer students, so if you don't get the grant money, we're not hiring them. I think that's the intent, right?
We would be able to hire 1.5, because at 50% funding, we could either hire 1.5 and so some of the programs, for instance, the federal ones, they only provided 8 weeks funding. They no longer are necessarily 16 weeks. So we could have 3 8-week contracts as opposed to 3 16-week contracts.
Well, I guess I'm wondering, and I hate to do away with summer jobs, but I'm just wondering whether we need them at all. I guess that's where I'm going.
Oh, well, so the business case for having the summer students in the first place, as identified in the workforce plan, is couple-fold. One, they do help us deliver on services that we provide under contract as part of MOUs. Number 2, they do provide capacity that allows full-time staff to take some time off in the summer. And 3, they help us deliver on some of the special projects that we're trying to make progress on. So for instance, in the water resources group, it's typically been a summer student that has helped us to make progress on our expansion of our field monitoring program and the retrofitting out of old technology with new technology and getting them the data into our WSKI system. So there's programming work that needs to be done. So we give them very fixed assignments that help us to implement some of the projects that you would have seen in this year's budget.
Yeah, no, and I get that. It's really a matter of how discretionary it is, because if you can get away in the end with only 1.5 summer students because you didn't get a grant, well, what does that say for the other summer students that you didn't hire? I mean, how, it comes down to just how discretionary they are, right? I'm just trying to get a read on that, because if you can live with just 1.5, then why aren't we living with just 1.5?
Well, so further to, there is no capacity in the summertime within the shop to do, it's very difficult for people to take vacation and not fall behind in key service areas. So this would have an impact on staff. If that's your question, that's the answer. It will have an impact on staff in terms of managing workload and stress in the workplace.
Okay, well then, I have another question then is if the 50% grant funding is $24,000, does that mean that the 3 summer students cost $48,800?
That's correct.
It costs $48,000.
Ange, can you verify that?
Yep, so the students were based on 37.5 hours a week times 17 weeks. And some of those positions would be more than a $15 an hour minimum wage. So some could be at $18 an hour if they're coming from university and a little higher credentials. Like Sally's intern will not be a $15 an hour student. So this is not the same students, but we use the same calculation. So the students are, for 3 students to have them for as a 0.33 staff each would be the 48.
And that's inclusive of overhead, Ange, is that correct?
Yep, sorry, all overhead and vacation pay and WSIB and such.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, we've got a few people with some comments and questions. Phil Sweetnam, you're next.
Yes, I agree with Janet that if we don't really need the summer students, let's not push it. But I sent a copy of something from this past month's Engineering News, where there is some advantage to getting people started in the company's program. And this one told the story of somebody at Ontario Hydro who was employed as a summer student and eventually worked up to now be the head of the nuclear department there. So it helps people gain some experience, and as long as we're really gaining something from their participation, then it's worthwhile doing by getting people into the system who are educated to do things. So as long as it's worth the effort that we have to put in it to supervise, I think we should try to at least apply for the grants and put that matching stuff to it. Thank you.
Thanks, Phil. Eli, you're next.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And Sally, did we ever do cost analysis if we don't hire the student and your staff is going to come back from vacation, and obviously some of them, they have to work overtime to catch up with what they left behind. Have we ever did the cost analysis if the student is saving us in that area? Because if you have to pay your staff overtime to cover what's missing at one time, I'm just wondering if it's overtime, it will increase on us, and how much will that increase? Did we ever have that cost analysis?
So the correlation would be that the work that the students are doing are either a combination of special projects or field work that we would undertake in the summer. Where the offsetting and the overtime that you're talking about comes to play is that by them doing that work, it allows the full-time staff to work on things like the review of planning and permit applications, etc. That's where we've seen that excessive, overtime, and that I speak to in the workforce plan, where it went from I think I don't have the numbers right in front of me, but in the 200s up to into the 300s over the past couple of years, because of all the overtime on planning and regs applications and the capital program. So to the degree that we don't have students to do, you know, these sorts of lesser tasks, it poses a time crunch to the full-time staff. In terms of the, you know, one-to-one correlation and cost analysis, we did the gross analysis in the workforce plan, but that's something we can absolutely come back and do that analysis for.
Okay, thanks, Sally.
Paul, you're next.
I wasn't so much on the students. I was kind of jumping ahead to number 11, but it does tie into students. I assumed the students would have ran that summer camp program. And I see you're looking at dropping it for $2,500. Why can't that program be run on a cost recovery basis or a cost generation basis versus a loss? And you could still have that program.
So that is how number 11 is delivered. It would be us contracting to RBCA to deliver the program for us. And this is us paying RBCA as a shared service provider to administer that summer camp for us. And they would run it on a full cost recovery basis.
Well, it's not full cost recovery if you're paying $2,500 for it.
It would be full cost recovery to RVCA in terms of the staff they would put on our site and manage on our behalf. In that they would charge their going rate and then this incremental amount. I mean, we could in theory run the same program and they just have a higher fee here. That's a possibility as well. I just don't know whether the rate that they'd end up having to charge, whether that would be within, you know, community threshold for how much people are willing to pay for a 1 week long summer camp. But you know, at this point, I'd say we have no intention of spending anything more than that 2,500. Like going forward, our camp program and our education program historically was definitely not full cost recovery. And so contracting out the camp program to another organization comes with significant savings, in fact. So at 2.5, you know, 2,500 to deliver that program in the scheme of things is quite modest, because, you know, picking up on our previous conversation about the summer students cost between 11 and, you know, 15,000 for a 16-week period. So, and you have to have 2 people, you know, typically for health and safety. So an 8-week program is the equivalent of 1 16-week employee. So typically it would cost at least $15,000 to run a summer camp program.
Yeah, so the thing though, looking at of your education review and stuff like that, obviously I'm going to be supporting dropping them if they're not cost recovery and you're not making money on them. Like, it's just things nowadays, like you go to hockey or anything else, everything is, as parents, and I'm a parent myself, you know, you pay and then you pay again. So the bottom line is that there shouldn't be things like this where the tax dollar is subsidizing programs like this. If the Conservation Authority wants to run them, that's great, but cost recovery, and you want to make some money on them too, if you're going to do them. And I don't think you're going to find it's going to be a cost point for most parents nowadays. When I start looking at the cost for things that my daughters and my other children have been involved in, which is hockey and dance and stuff like that, and a week away for scouting is very expensive. So if you're going to lose money on these, I wouldn't support doing them. That's bottom line.
Do we have any other comments or questions at this point, or should we continue onto the next table, 205? Okay, let's go ahead, Sally.
Okay, so table 5 identifies projects that had been approved to be funded under the operating reserve and that we're proposing to move on to the Glencairn Reserve because these 4 projects do qualify under the provincial regulations or policy to be funded through the Glencairn. So the remainder of the Lower Mississippi floodplain mapping review, you'll recall we had to come to the board last year, or I guess earlier this year, to look for funding to do that review. So it's not completed this year, so the balance to be funded in 2022 would come from the Glencairn. Similarly, the watershed model development and calibration that was approved, the balance of it would be funded through the Glencairn going forward. And then the 2 loans that had been approved coming from the operating reserve, we would move into the Glencairn. So that's, removes pressure from the operating reserve of 174,500. So the net impact of these you see in table 6 here. So the 63 on the operational savings, the 34.4 on the workforce plan savings, and then the reallocation of the reserve for basically the same amount of money that, in terms of the envelope that was approved, we're able to move from 33% of the workforce plan funded on the levy up to 63% without impacting the general levy at all. But the impact on the reserve balance is significant. We absolutely achieved that 600,000 minimum that was established by the committee last week. So I think I've already covered this. So this is what was approved in terms of levies, and it basically stays more or less the same. This went up by $30. Do you want me to stop sharing, or do we have further questions here?
I can see everybody. I don't see any hands up at this point. Was there any other comments or questions to any of the tables that we're seeing? Go ahead, Janet.
Yeah, I was just trying to go back to my notes. I think another area that we wanted to look at was the fees and the fees that we charge. And I recognize that there are some difficulties because we harmonize our fees with RBCA and South Nation. And I think we've actually even already approved them, if I recall. But there was I'm just asking, was there any examination of the ability to increase those fees?
So no, not per se. That's where, sorry, rather than looking at increasing the fees, we simply looked at whether or not we could increase the revenues from where the fees are coming from. So because we do feel it would be very difficult for us to increase our fees in a manner that would be out of step with our partners at South Nation and Rideau Valley in the city of Ottawa. There had also been concern expressed by some of the committee members about whether an increase in fees was feasible in their jurisdiction. So rather than changing the fees, we changed the revenues associated with the fees.
And maybe I'll just add to that. When I touched base with Sally after our meeting last week, we did touch on the fees component. There could have been a jump into creating a fee that was different for outside of the city of Ottawa than within the city of Ottawa, but we quickly put that aside, realizing that would not be palatable by the board. But I did encourage that we look at where there could be other revenues realized. And is it next year or is it 2023 that the fee study is happening?
The fee studies to happen in 2023.
Okay. So at that point, it'll be all three of us looking at it. And perhaps part of that, we do consider if we want to have a different set of fees for outside of the city of Ottawa than within. I tend to think that probably won't be something as palatable, having higher fees out here. But anyway, that was part of our discussion post meeting last week.
Well, just a comment on that to finish my comment on the fees. I'm not sure that it necessarily implies that fees need to be higher outside of Ottawa. I would have thought it would be the other way around. And I'm wondering whether the fee study can take place, and I realize it's a transition year, but can take place in 2022 so that new fees could be applied in the 2023 budget. So, so I'm just think maybe we need to be a little more aggressive on this. I understand 2022 is set fine, but why can't we do the study in 2022 and apply that in 2023 and consider looking at maybe all three conservation authorities raise their fees? Maybe we look at, Ottawa bearing more of the brunt. I think it depends, of course, on which are the more complex permits. And then maybe it's not so much based on Ottawa versus not Ottawa, but the complexity of the application, whatever. Anyway, so I think we need to be a little more proactive on the fees than waiting till 2023. Thank you.
Would there be a budgetary implication if we move that into 2022, Sally?
Yes, there would be. The three CAs were looking to share in the costs. I think in our draft budget that we have created for next year as part of like our 3-year running budget behind the scenes, I'm thinking we set between 15 and 25 for the three CAs each to contribute to that study. Just so you know, I actually did want to do it in 2023. It was the other two CAs that just felt they did not have the capacity, given everything that's coming down the pipe with the regulatory changes, to do it next year. So
okay. Thanks, Sally. I see Phil Sweetnam has a comment.
Well, I'm supportive of what Janet was saying, but I recognize that we have to be part of a team, and I guess we have to wait till that means that if we do the study in 2023, we can only implement fee increases in 2024. Is that correct?
I guess it would depend on what time of year and whether the boards were willing to implement a mid-year change. I mean, these things aren't fixed, but they may become so because we're actually anticipating another regulation down from the province regarding fee changes, like how conservation authorities set their fees. It's supposed to come out this year. I don't know. But that's another reason, in fact, why, we need to see and understand that regulation and the implications of it before we're even, setting the terms of reference and scope of work for that study.
I would just comment, I believe it's important not only in the city of Ottawa that the fees be the same across the various authorities. It's not it's not very practical to say, well, if you're in the north part of this ward, the thinking of Goulburn, the MVCA's fees apply, and in the south part of the ward, excuse me, the Rideau Valleys. I think we really need, but that doesn't only apply in Ottawa. I'm sure there are other jurisdictions where they have both 2 or 3 authorities, probably more likely 2 authorities in one jurisdiction. So there's some merit to that. What I'm not sure, Paul and I are close together. For years, I've tried to be generous with the fund, the MVC fund, but it always annoyed me just a little bit when we start paying the school board to pay for transportation to come, because otherwise they couldn't afford it. Well, I'm not too sympathetic to the school board, but there might be a place where an individual, you set your fees that are cost recovery, but have the ability to accommodate somebody where there is a legitimate challenge in the finances of the family. Anyway, uh, in going forward, I hope we don't have to subsidize the transportation costs. Would be better, I would think, to send the educator to the school, and I wouldn't mind paying for transportation costs for that. Thank you.
Thanks, Phil. I think we're okay to stop the screen share at this point. Thank you. Do we have other comments and or any questions to staff on this revised draft? Our next step would be choosing to accept this or make further direction to staff for other changes. So I've got some other hands up again here. So Eli, I'll go to you first. You're just, there you go.
Sometimes I'm just wondering, at some point, maybe we need to have a discussion about the education piece. I mean, if everything has to be cost recovery, I guess I would have to challenge that with other level of government. But all I'm saying, as a conservation authority, we have a great deal of benefit when people understand what we do and what the conservation is all about. So yes, we might sometimes, you see, you're spending a little bit of money to educate some people or some kids and make sure that, but I mean, if we didn't do this, if we didn't send police to the school as a school resource officer to talk about drugs, if we didn't send staff to talk about the recycle, the blue bin, the green bin, and black bin, I bet you a lot of kids don't even, now today, kids are teaching their parents how to do recycling. So please, let's not, let's get to the nickel and dime, and we expect to see cost benefit from education. Education is that's why we pay so much money to educate our kids and our people. So if the board wants to debate that one day, it's fine. We can brainstorm it, but I mean, we shouldn't really look at whether summer camp or educational piece, or it's just it's about money, because sometimes it's more than just money. Thank you. And Madam Chair, just since I have you, maybe Sally or Angie can share the screen with the revised. I apologize for that because I wasn't here last time toward the end because I had to go to a city committee meeting, which they spend a lot more money than what we do here. But it'll be important to see the changes, one versus the other, if it's possible.
Is that something that you've got available, we can pull up, Angie or Sally?
Yeah, I'm
Okay.
doing it right here.
Perfect.
Sorry, I just. So this is the budget that was tabled last week. And this is what we're tabling today. So the only difference is $30 on the general levy, $30 on the total amount levied. So this is where those various savings have allowed us to put more of the workforce plan on the levy and less on the operating reserve.
And is it fair to say, Sally, that $30 will not change the percentage of the levy increase? Would that change the percentage?
No, all the percentages that the board approved, in terms of, growth and inflation and those assumptions haven't changed at all.
That's right.
And we consider this like $30 or like a rounding thing because we used, 0 zeros, et cetera, on some items. Others were fixed, but, for all intents and purposes, absolutely, they're the same assumptions as the board approved in October.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Bill King, you're next.
Yeah, I guess a general comment. I still feel that overall this is a very generous budget. I agree with the comments made by Janet, all of them, and in particularly take note of the comments about the summer students. This either is essential spending or it's not. This is either keeping our lights on and keeping our services going, or it's not. We cannot sustain 4% and 5% rate hikes every year. And in a year when I need to go back to my taxpayers and tell them, we're going to raise, your taxes by 4% this year. I'm not going to be able to do that. But I have to pass on a 4% increase from the Conservation Authority. I think these are extraordinary times. I think that we're just cutting around the edges, and I think that we're going to be in for a big rethink sooner rather than later about what's essential and what's not. I don't come here with a list of things. I try to just listen to what people are saying and be supportive where I can. But I think in the future, now that I'm learning the budget process, I think one of the problems with it is we approved the municipal levies before we ever dealt with the budget. Maybe we've got things backwards. So anyway, that's just my general thoughts. It's not a horrible budget. It's just, I don't think it reflects at all the severe pressures that we are under and that we will be under as public stewards of the taxpayers. And on that note, I do want to say I disagree 100% with Eli, if I understand what he's saying. I believe in cost recovery. I think everything the Conservation Authority does in terms of a service needs to get the cost recovered. The days of subsidizing developers are over, in my judgment. Thank you very much.
Phil Sweetnam, you're next. Phil, you're muted.
Sorry.
I was just, if I may, just more clarification. I don't think I ever said I want to subsidize the developers whatsoever. I was talking about the education about the conservation, to whether to the summer camp or to the student camp. It's not everything about the money when it comes to education. That's in general, but that's not, to be honest with you, to be debated on a budget day. That's something the board needs to have a session where we agree what is your mandate is and what you want. But I never want to subsidize developer. I get screwed enough from developer in my community. The last thing I want to do is subsidize them anyway. So I need to clear that for the record. Thank you.
So we're going to go to Phil Sweetnam for comment.
I think I was just going to echo that. Over the years, we've always tried to be sure that the development community paid their way. I'm not sure in the current year whether it's everything, but we're trying to make sure that developers, if they need services from the conservation, those should definitely be cost recovery. We haven't been quite so good on the individual people asking them to pay full cost recovery. And the question is, where do you want to get your people to cry from that the budget's too high or that the fees are too high? So anyway, that would be my comment. I agree with Eli in the sense that the education is important, even if it costs us a bit. What I guess was a little upset about is I think we need to really change the focus of, instead of saying to people, come here to the Milliken Tail and see the wonderful things we have. Maybe we can go to places like the Carp River project in Canada. We pay for one person to drive there and provide education services there, rather than subsidizing a whole busload of kids to come out to Almont and the Milliken Tail. And so I think we're at Edam on the idea education is important and worth, even if we have to invest a little bit in the program. It should be more cost effective to be delivering the program on that wonderful facility on the Carp River. Anyway, just the final thing I just want to comment on, what we've done here is really moved stuff onto the budget and taken it away from the operating levy, but we've taken it away from the Glencairn Reserve. We really are quite addicted to the reserves, but they're not going to last forever. And I'm not sure we've completely addressed that problem of taking too much money from reserves to try and get our programs going. I'm pleased to see that we said we can put off Widow Lake and a couple of other projects. So, but I'm still thinking that we're a little too addicted to reserves to try and keep the program going, and we may have to look at as we go forward in future years. Overall, though, I think staff have done a good job on looking at things. Thank you.
Next is Janet.
Yeah, I think it's important to note that education is not a mandatory service. And so we will not be funding education out of a levy once 2023 comes along. So if anything regarding education is going to have to be cost recovery or covered in an MOU or covered by a grant in the future, right? So and I think one of the reasons that Sally has put the education study in there, which is now more funded by the foundation, is to try to determine how to deliver education without any levy funding. And I don't have a problem with that. I mean, I agree with Eli in principle. I think, education is great. Exposing kids to the outdoors and to new concepts and things. I think it's important for them to be on site and not in a schoolroom. But on the other hand, that's not the job of the Conservation Authority. And so, we will not be funding that in the future. And I think the other important thing, and I agree with Phil, because I have still kind of the same reaction as Phil and Bill, which is that we are still kind of spending beyond our means, and we're dipping into these operating reserves, and we're lucky we have them. I can partially understand it because there are many things that did not get done by the Conservation Authority over the last few years that should have been done. And so we're sort of making up for things that should have been done. Some of these models and LiDARs that are necessary for the core mandate. But I think when we are thinking about 2023 budget, I think we're going to see and need to see this budget shrink. And I think, we should, and it should occur because there's a lot of these extraordinary items. We should not be seeing them in the future. So I am certainly willing to approve this budget and to send it to the board, but I send it with a cautionary comment for the future. Thank you.
Thanks, Janet. Bill King, did you have another comment? Or is that
I
an
don't.
old? Oh, that's an old
I
hand.
apologize.
That's all right. That's all right. Was there any other comments or any questions for staff? Jeff, please go ahead.
I just want to echo pretty much everything that Janet said with respect to the future of the budget and its need to shrink as some of these extraordinary programs go by the wayside. But even under the current mandate, delivering core programs, the cost of those core programs are subject to inflation. We're also heading into a period of capital spending for the authority that's budgeted at current levels, but we've all seen what's gone on with construction costs and those costs, and we're also anticipating an increase in the cost of borrowing money. So this is another cost that's going to hit us in the coming years. But so we're looking at increasing costs. The current regulations put those core functions squarely within the municipal levy. So that municipal levy is going to grow unless we can shrink the budget. But I would like to point to one item in the budget, the one line item that is never increasing, in fact, has shrunk over the years, and that's the provincial transfer payment. The amount of money that we're getting from the provincial government to deliver essential services to municipalities is not keeping pace with inflation. It's not keeping pace with the cost of living in any sense of reality, and that is something that needs to be looked at. We're relying increasingly on federal grant money and federal funding opportunities to fund the things that are considered essential, and the fact that provincial money is just not coming in and is not being made available to us to do this kind of work is a problem that also needs to be addressed in the future if we're going to be able to continue to deliver core services in a way that our municipalities can rely on us to deliver. So I'm happy to pass this budget, but again, I think 2023 is going to be a different kettle of fish when we go through this conversation.
Thank you for your comments, Jeff. Were there any other comments Eli.
Just a quick comment, and sometimes we somehow we debate things on budget time where it should be, policy of its own before. So maybe the board should have a few hour retrieve one day and decide what is core service. Like, because I can assure you, everyone see core services different. And I think that's important one day to have that discussion. And maybe that doesn't, I agree with, we don't want to fund stuff, we can't afford to fund. We want to make sure we do the core service. But what is the core service? And how does everybody define that? Just like people say, oh, we enjoy the rural living. What's a rural living different than other living? I still need, So I would like to see ourselves have a time to think about those things. Do we need that? Are we going to support that? Yes, I know the federal government giving us some grant because the federal government, they still think there's a climate change and we need to invest in it, and provincial government don't see that and they don't invest in it. That's a fundamental debate, but that's not really a budget debate. So I hope the board, Mr. Chair, you can take some times in the future and find us some half-a-day retreat where we can talk about what is the core service and what is our mandate and what we would like to do and not to do. If you just want to be there just to give permits to the developer or support municipality when they want something from you, that's fine. Let's just say that then. But if you want to be a conservation, talk about the environment, talk about the water, about the wildlife, talk about protection of this area, well, maybe we need to talk about it. We need to be on the same page. Because it's not our staff here to defend what's a core service, what's not. You as a board, you decide what the core service is and ask them to have a budget according with what you think that's your core service. But I will support this budget and I applaud the staff for being so creative, trying to continue what we do and please, the budget pressure. We all have a budget pressure. Everywhere you go is a budget pressure. But I don't think this is really on the staff to defend it. It's not the staff's budget. It's you and I's budget. Give clear direction, and then you'll get the budget you want from staff.
Thanks, Eli. Sally, I think you want to respond? Your hands up.
Yeah, I just had one comment, and that is in the board package that is maybe in your inbox already for December 1st is the transition plan under one of the new regulations. And one of the key activities, in fact, that we have to do before the end of February as a board is define exactly what Eli said, which is what are our current programs and services, and are they core? Which the province has classified as category 1, is like our core mandate under the legislation. Category 2 are areas where we'd enter into MOUs with municipalities for services that typically you would provide as municipalities, but for whatever reason you're contracting to the CA to provide. And then category 3 are all those other things that are, we'll say, nice to haves, that don't qualify as core and aren't subject to MOUs. So that's absolutely something that we're going to be engaging with you very soon.
Thank you for that, Sally. Other comments or other directions to staff on items we're wanting to discuss in the future away from budget time? I have been making some notes here. And it sounds like the desire, a number of people have brought up the desire to discuss those education programs moving forward. And sounds like that'll be part of what Sally just described. Certainly, I think we're all saying something similar in terms of wanting developers to pay their way, and those fees will be looked at. It's unfortunate that the other two CAs don't want to do that next year, but we do know that that'll be happening in 2023. Jeff raised a good point about the provincial funding being stagnant. This is the same as what we're seeing with the WECI funding on the capital side. So perhaps in a future meeting, we may want to discuss a strategy to to bring that up, or as municipalities, we have opportunities through, Roma delegations or whatnot, if that's something we may want to address as well. And then Sally, as you said, we'll be having that discussion about core services and our mandate in our future meeting. Phil Sweetnam, you have another comment?
Just a short one. For for the WECI funding, it's not only the amount that's horrible in the program, it's that they take so darn long to approve it that you're right into the, like trying to have the project finished in the budgetary year, which makes it nice for the accountants, isn't very practical from an engineering point of view of when you need to get it done and when we get approvals, so I'm sure staff would work on that one. The other comment I'd just like to say, as I've watched the news recently, so many even engineers are commenting, there's no central source where the people can find out if they're in floodplains and that sort of thing. I don't think that applies as much here in Ontario, but you may not be able to call it an education program, but there's no sense of having all of our floodplain maps up on the internet if we don't tell people about it and get out to where you have to go, Lions Club meeting, and say, look, it's there. Get to the real estate board and say, you owe it to your clients to be looking at the floodplain mapping, and so people know what's involved. So you may not want to, maybe we can't call it education anymore, but we have to be able to tell people about the great work that we're doing and doing substantially better than many of the provinces where people are being flooded and so on. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Phil. Yeah, and I appreciate the comment about the WECI funding timing. That's, the worst time of the year to be going out and tendering something. Like, you guarantee you're getting the worst prices. So there's a comment there too. Janet. You're muted, Janet. Nope. There you
I'm
are.
ready to move. I'm ready to move that we accept the motion. If you're
Okay,
looking for that.
that would be great, Janet. So our motion is moved by Janet Mason, seconded by Paul Kehoe, that the Finance and Administration Advisory Committee recommend the revised draft 2022 budget as presented in this report to Board of Directors for consideration and approval to circulate to member municipalities for comment. So it's moved and seconded. Is there any final comments on this motion? Seeing none, all in favor? Thank you, and the motion carries. So thanks very much, everyone. Thank you very much to staff. You were certainly very creative, and we didn't give you a lot of time to turn some of this around. And the 3 or 4 items that I had just mentioned before our vote, I think there'll be some really fruitful discussion on this moving forward, because there certainly is a time of change, and as an organization, as a board, we'll have to decide what the direction is, so we're clear for staff. And moving forward, we know what is in our vision and what is out of our scope. So I thank you all for your attention, and I guess we'll see each other again next Wednesday.
And so we have
And is that a Zoom meeting or is it an in-person meeting we're talking about? Thank you.
Zoom.
It's a Zoom meeting, Phil.
Thank you.
To say we have a birthday carried budget for Ange.
Yeah.
Should we sing?
No,
Oh, no, please don't ask that.
Sally already did for me today.
Oh, there we go.
I'll move to adjourn.
Thank you very much, Jeff. And is there a seconder, please? Thank you, Bill King. All in favor? Thank you very much, everyone. We're adjourned.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
See you next week.
Thanks, everyone. Happy birthday, Ange.
Thanks.
Yeah,
Happy birthday.
Thank you.
If I'd known it was a birthday, I'd have sent a cake.